Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 26 of our daily embodiment practice. 31 days of reading a book, having a form, and then stepping into embodiment. If this is your first day with us, welcome. I have been, through the course of this month in December of 2022, created a little personal challenge for myself to do a daily embodiment video. And embodiment really is a word that I have been so grateful to come across. And a lot of people utilize embodiment practices in different ways. There are different kinds that one can do. The way in which I enjoy diving into embodiment is by really listening to the body and having a sort of somatic conversation, soma meaning body, and an intuitive, expressive experience, and allow the intuitive expressivity to be coupled with a kind of conscious awareness, and then hold space to bridge a completion process of something that might feel like a creative block or a core wound or assertive inner conflict that I've been having a hard time with, or that a client has been having a hard time with, or when I work in group dynamics for classes or for workshops, then it can sometimes also even be an ensemble-based collective completion process or recovery, healing kind of a process, which feels like the home that I love to live in. Most of my stuff does come back to integrating the fullness of the self, and it is really about bridging a space between the mind and the body, about bridging a space between what we feel inside of our inner selves and what we are able, willing, wanting to share with the outer world, and allowing there to be a clarity and an honesty about where things might not be aligning, and finding ways to open space for more clarity, more alignment, more breadth of transparency. And sometimes that means that things fall away and we totally get we're on the same page underneath all of the conflict. And other times things fall away and we totally get that we may have thought we were on the same page and we were on completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And those are very interesting experiences as well. And I feel like I've been having more and more of those core dynamics in my relationships throughout the course of the last couple years. I think the more deeply I've stepped into my personal practice, as well as diving into other people's held space and also holding space for others as well, the more I am finding that there is a very specific kind of core alignment that I have that is really at the heart, the soul, the core of it, about liberating the shadow aspects of ourselves, about coming into connection with, for inner parts work, which is a therapeutic modeling, there is this saying that there are no bad parts. And I believe that phrase is from internal family systems, if I'm correct. There are many different therapists who work with inner parts. And I have had a really beautiful experience of feeling like the more I understand about internal psychological structures and different clusters of personality content that might create a personality disorder or neurodivergence or an experience of a mood disorder, the more I learn about those components and the more I find the heart, the core, the soul of how effective models of therapy that work in a core alignment to my belief system come into practice and play, the more I'm able to utilize that as a way to frame and house and hold my practice, the smoother the experience tends to be. And so I think a lot of what I have been really discovering that I value deeply is to be able to come into connection with the sacred part of ourselves, the sacred part of our creative energies, the sacred part of our life force, the power that we hold within, which is really aligned to that personal power, that core content. So much of that, there is a magic in there. And that magic, oftentimes people are afraid of. And for those of us who choose to utilize it in a certain way, sometimes we are demonized or otherized, or certain kinds of perspectives and religious doctrines will very specifically disallow our practices. And I want to be aware of that as I continue to move through the world, and also not minimize the implications of the way in which I work, which I sometimes speak to very directly, and other times I sort of talk around a little bit. And right now, I feel like I want to delve into something that feels really topical today. I know yesterday's last video, we talked about maybe coming back to this book, The Art of Receiving and Giving, The Wheel of Consent by Betty Martin, DC. But something today, after a series of experiences and also just where my heart is right now, I feel like I want to bring in this book, which is for the first time in this series. It's called Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, and it is by Pete Walker, author of The Tao of Fully Feeling. And it says, Pete Walker's new book is an invaluable, comprehensive resource for anyone with a childhood history of trauma. This book is certain to benefit clients and clinicians alike. And a lot of what I have discovered that self-care for performers really is about is being able to be with our personal honesty around the traumas that we've experienced in childhood for complex trauma, but also really learn how to be honest with ourselves and with one another in community about the trauma in our early creative training, as well as that is perpetuated in a cyclical way, in a systemic way, even in the industry or the institutions that we are working within or that we are longing to be accepted by or to break into. And I've also been looking at this word called limerence, a kind of spiritual experience and obsession that happens when someone meets someone, and it's like an instant head over heels in love kind of an experience. Oftentimes limerence happens when there is early childhood trauma, that there is some sort of abandonment wound, a neglect wound, and there is this sort of desire that the person has to fill the source of emptiness with another person. And sometimes there will be moments when there is another person that feels like they fit into that longing. And I want to open up the possibility for some of you that there may also be a kind of early childhood wounding or neglect that you may have had, or that some of your peers may have had, or that many of us that are just in the creative community have had, where we didn't get our early childhood emotional needs attuned to for a number of reasons. And this leaves oftentimes an empty vacancy of emotional longing. And sometimes the idea or the experience of performing, being in a performing arts space where you are the performer, you are the focus, you are the embodied channeler of big feelings, or sometimes there's a fulfillment in what wasn't tended to when we were younger that we see as possible inside of our creative performing arts career. And that can be very dangerous when we are someone with complex trauma, when we have CPTSD. I'm feeling today like I really want to just do a little bit of thumb through, open to a page, see what page I land on, and just read you a section and see if that works. I really value working in that way. I love to do cards, tarot cards or medicine cards or divination cards of sorts. And for me, something about that process of not knowing what you're going to get and feeling and trusting and knowing that you're in communication with something that holds medicine, wisdom, information that could be true to the moment, true to the heart, and allowing there to be a kind of intuitive, spiritual, soul-centered guidance to find what that is. So we're going to do that today. So I want to take a deep breath. You can breathe with me if you like, and I'm just going to ask that whatever page we open to, that it is medicine for the collective audience of this particular video. For self-care for performers. Okay, ready? Here we go. Emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman defines emotional intelligence as our ability to successfully recognize and manage our own feelings and to healthily respond to the feelings of others. As implied above, I believe the quality of our emotional intelligence is reflected in the degree to which we accept all of our feelings without automatically dissociating from them or expressing them in a way that hurts ourselves or others. When we are emotionally intelligent, we also extend this acceptance to our intimates. And I want to say intimates can also mean creative collaborators for the way in which I'm using the concept of creative intimacy with the work for self-care for performers is I want to invite the potential, the possibility that we can utilize some of the relational tools for close relationships with the way in which we value the intimacy and the trust that's involved with the creative process and collaborating together. Okay, what was I saying? One of my clients calls this the hallmark of relationships. Another way of saying this is that I have self-esteem to the degree that I keep my heart open to myself in all my emotional states. That's beautiful. And I have intimacy when my friend and I offer this type of emotional acceptance to each other. Once again, this does not condone destructive expressions of anger, which are, of course, counterproductive to trust and intimacy. CPTSD engendered parents often hypocritically attack their children's emotional expression in a bimodal way. And I want to say anytime the word parents and children are used, I want to also think of that as educator and like performance students as well, because I think there's a lot of mirroring that can happen as we are learning about how to utilize ourselves in relationship with our creative energies, either at home as kids or in creative performing arts practice in relationship to training. This occurs when the child is both abused for emoting and is at the same time abused by her caretaker's toxic emotional expression. So sometimes there is like, you're not allowed to have emotions, and then you get too many emotions. And so those dynamics, I think, I don't want to break it down too much today because I'm feeling a little fuzzy and tender, but I think that you let me know in the comments if you want to about if that resonates with you as being something that you've seen inside of your training experiences too. Most traumatizing parents are especially contemptuous towards the child's expression of emotional pain. This contempt then forces the child's all-important capacity for healthy grieving into developmental arrest. So you get stuck. So say maybe you had a big emotional pain as a dancer, and your emotional pain because maybe you fell out of a turn or you missed an entrance on stage or you broke an ankle and you couldn't do a show, and maybe there was contempt from your teacher, your trainer, your parents, even your peers, and you weren't able to grieve for the experience that happened, to really feel the impact of what happened. And I think there's a lot of desire in the performing arts and also just in sort of Western colonial culture in general to bypass our harder feelings, to brush off grief, to let go of anything that doesn't feel clean in a kind of way so that we can show up ready. And as a performer, as a performing artist, we're often expected to shake things off, leave everything at the door, and then come in ready and just get rid of everything else. And I think, well, there can be, a healthy way in which one can learn how to be able to contain certain aspects of themselves so that we protect ourselves and others from something, but to either disregard or shove down and then try to never deal with, that can create a lot of pain, and it can compounded over time when we keep experiencing those kinds of relational dynamics. That is a relational dynamic that would create the breeding ground for complex trauma, for CPTSD. Okay, one archetypal example of this is seen in the parent who hurts his child to the point of tears and then has the nerve to say, "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about." A client once told me that he often fantasized about giving his father this angry reply: What are you talking about? You already gave me something to cry about. He did not, however, because he had long since learned that getting angry back was a capital crime that would elicit the most savage retaliation. Typically, it would be delivered with homicidal rage. I'll knock you from here to kingdom come. The above is, of course, a blatant example of the slaughtering of emotional expression. Just as common is the insidious passive aggressive assault and emoting, which is seen in the parent who shuns her child for expressing his feelings. This is seen in the emotionally abandoning parent who sequesters the child in a timeout for crying or routinely retreats from the crying child into her room. The worst, most damaging example of this occurs when this is done to the pre-verbal toddler or baby who only has emotions with which to express herself. Pre-verbal children are by definition far too young to learn the 2 to 3-year-old's developmental task of using her words to communicate about her feelings. An especially nasty form of emotional abuse occurs in the traumatizing family when the child is even attacked for displays of pleasant emotion. As I write this, I flash back to scenes of my mother sneering at my little sister and snarling, "What are you so happy about?" And my father's frequent, "What are you laughing at? Wipe that smile off your face." Emotional abuse is also almost always also accompanied by emotional abandonment, which can most simply be described as a relentless lack of parental warmth and love. Sometimes this is most poignantly described as not being liked by your parents, which belies the many CPTSD-inducing parents who say they love their children, but demonstrate in 1,000 ways that they do not like them. "The sight of you makes me sick" was very popular with such parents when I was growing up. It can still bring tears to my eyes to remember my emotionally abandoned young sister secreted in a corner of the house begging our family dog, "Like me, Ginger, like me." God, that's hard. I want to just put my hand on my heart because the amount of experiences I know of in my community, whether it's the performing arts community or my personal community, they're often overlapping, that have received that kind of dynamic from family or from performance training environments is just so prevalent. And I'm really aware of how in the book they express that like destructive anger is not good, right? I might at some point really dive in through this book about, well, how is healthy anger expressed? From what I gather, from what's been working for me, is really using healthy anger to ground more firmly in oneself and clarify boundaries, clarify agency, clarify where one stands without pushing through someone else's boundaries. Even as sometimes when someone's crossed ours, it means we have to extract ourselves or just create space somehow. We can utilize at least the energy, right? Like we're not from like a place of physical violence, even as maybe like punching a pillow might be helpful, or going somewhere where you can let out some sort of steam, maybe a boxing class or go to your dance class or take an angry monologue and work it in acting. I think a lot of us will utilize the performing arts as a way to channel a lot of the repressed emotions that we wouldn't be able to express otherwise. I know that's a big reason why I chose the performing arts. A lot of my friends have expressed that people just want to be seen, just want to be clapped at, really like the attention. That's actually the opposite of what has drawn me in many ways to the performing arts. The attention and being seen and the clapped at is actually the part that I don't much like. I'm learning how to appreciate it. I'm learning how to accept it, and with like an honest kind of appreciation. Whereas in the past, I have been like, "Oh, that's great. Oh, that's nice." And I've met it with like as much kindness as possible, or sometimes I'm sure not too. But the part for me that I really find valuable as a performing artist, as a kind of sacred theater, is that we create this beautiful held space in order to experience things that we might not have the agency, the ownership, the outlet to be able to give voice to in our life at home. And giving voice to the unheard parts of ourselves gives them an opportunity to be seen. And once they have an opportunity to be seen, they have the potential to be met with compassion, with love, with kindness for a form of recovery. And whether that happens in a very private journaling process and practice, or an insular therapy session, or a physical theater exercise where you're channeling different kinds of improvisational games that dislodge and bring up things from within that attune to any kind of content that you're bringing in, whether that's a theme that you're working with, or whether that is text that might also be present, or archetype or story. But there's so much valuable there, and using a kind of sacred theater in order to gain access to giving breath and space to those hurt parts of ourselves, to that CPTSD aspect. Now, here's the tricky thing. When we are working in career, right, and money and time and deadlines are on the table, it becomes a very tender spot. And so I want us to, at minimum, just for today, flag that, not necessarily have like a big fix it strategy for it, but flag that, know that, note that, and then not blame yourself if you have a hard time. And be able to note that that is a hard thing, to open up all of these emotional experiences in the name of character and story and project that you may or may not be getting paid for, right? Because a lot of us will invest into portfolio content to build into our career or to get experience, but that there's a way in which certain kinds of communities in the performing arts and in spiritual communities will utilize embodiment practices, somatic attunement, consent, awareness of trauma. Or I'll say this, I'm hoping to find more and more like that. I know practitioners who value those things and are starting to bridge into more aware alert practices that utilize that, and or have been exploring how to do that for a while. It's something that certain languaging around that is newer to me, but it's the work that I've been doing, I think, since it's just the work that I know that I've always been looking to do and studying from a distance to figure out what's going on when you're in a room, whether it's a theater and you're watching a film, or whether it's a theater and you're watching a live performance, and you can just hear a pin drop because everybody is fixated, transfixed to a moment, because there's some sort of magical alchemy happening. And in those states, in those places, I have a sense of that being this really tenderness that we can come into connection with, like a core part, a core piece of humanity's suppleness, where if we treat it tenderly, if we give it reverence, if we allow it to really feel safe with us as we are witnessing it as audience, or as we are channeling it as artist, creator, if there's this reverence and sacredness to it, there can be so much healing as the organic, somatic, body-based experience guides the next right step to see what unfolds from there. This is sort of the core of a lot of my practice. And I know this is an embodiment, and I already feel like I've started, but I'm going to stand up and do something. I've got my mom is here for the holidays, and she's got her little futon bed out. She's taking a bath. Okay. Let's do, maybe I'll just do, I am now a sacred theater. I am now a sacred theater. I feel my hand on my belly and on my heart, center of gravity, center of levity. And also the heart being the bridge between the upper and lower chakras of the more mindful spiritual realms and the more earth, soulful physical realms. And I feel so good in the base of it, the basin of it. And I know that part of me from here, if I can, as opposed to from up there moving down, but from the base, if I can find the base and then integrate the up or down into the base, this is the practice that I enjoy. That can come sometimes be subversive in a like functional energetics version of like what spiritual alignments mean. And if you don't know what I mean by that, that's okay. And if you do, you probably have, if you do know what I mean by that, there's probably some sort of practice you have that has a similar essence or vibration to it or alignment. And so it may be different than how I very specifically mean it, because each of our practices are different and how we've learned is different and how we practice is different. But there also may be some sort of like a synchronistic awareness. I don't know what I'm doing, but it feels good. I feel like I'm just sort of slowly allowing this field of like light or like rainbow or like something, but like I want to bring up the dark into the sky, the birthing shadow, so that my heart can share it, which feels really necessary to be like, you haven't been willing to see me here. And to do this, not just on a personal level, but on a level that feels representative of like collective trauma, is such a core piece for me in my work. And I am not all cultures, and there are plenty of community experiences that I don't house in my body and my lineage that are so necessary here. And I want to honor and also welcome those energies into this representation in which I'm moving for right now, as feels right and good for those energies. And again, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, then that's okay. You don't need to right now, just yet. And going into the details of it at some point might be something that works out for you or for me or for us to do together. And if not, the point, the purpose is to get the energy to move in a certain pattern. My arm wrapping over. This is very much not me doing this right now. Just going to be quiet and let things happen. I don't know if you can hear, but there's been fireworks outside. Some are playing right now. Playing right now, going off right now. Ah. This space, this heart space, the willingness to concave, the willingness to go in, the willingness to contract, the willingness to get dark and ugly and in the mix of it, so that you can find your way through and help others do the same. Whew. All right. I think that's it for today. Let me know what you got from this. Deep breath in, hand on heart, exhale, release anything that you're ready to release. And again, deep breath in, draw in what feels good and right to you, whatever that is, even if it's very different than what I was just doing for me. Exhale. If you can, breathe it up and down your spine, opening in between the vertebrae. Maybe you can do both, or maybe you want to do one or the other. Again, deep breath in. Lengthening through the spine, exhale. Widening through the heart and the throat. I'll see you tomorrow.